Steven Kotler. Welcome back to Roll with the Punches. How are you?
I'm great. It's good to be with you.
It's good to be with you too. Look, you haven't been a peak performer as yet when it comes to internet. That's disappointing, isn't it?
I'm not a peak performer at all when it comes to personal technology. The running joke at my company is I can explain the Large Hadron Collider, but I can't download an app. And it's true. It's like absolutely true.
Oh, that is hilarious. I forgot that when I first jumped on, I forgot that I had an intro planned for you, which I then forgot because we had internet problems. I was going to introduce you as Benjamin Button because I remember last time nearly dropping dead when you said your age, and I feel like you're just getting younger and younger.
I'm trying. Trying.
Whatever you're doing, it's working. I'm going to throw myself into peak performance.
The new book, which drops in February, is in our country, is on peak performance aging. Oh. So that is, so the subject is obviously kind of smack in the middle of research. I'm doing research, the Flow Research Collective has been doing. But there's also a lot of it. The more you dig into peak performance aging, the more it comes back to work I've already been doing. Flow plays such a crucial role in helping us age really, really well. So it dovetails in nicely with work we've already done.
Well, I'm going to love unpacking this. For anyone that's not super familiar with flow and flow states, do you want to give them the flow states for dummies?
Yeah, flow states for dummies. So every human being is hardwired for optimal performance, for peak performance. And it's a built-in feature of being human, right? It's all in all our biology. And the state of consciousness that we use to describe peak performance is called flow. You may know it as runner's high or being in the zone or being unconscious. But flow is a technical term. It is defined as an optimal state of consciousness, one where we feel our best and we perform our best. And more specifically, it's just any of those moments of rapt attention and total absorption. So you get so focused on what you're doing, everything else just starts to disappear. Action and awareness are going to merge a little bit. Your sense of self is going to dial down, maybe disappear completely. Time's going to pass strangely. Usually it speeds up, right? You get so sucked into what you're doing. A couple hours go by and you're like, oh, where'd it go? Sometimes it'll slow down, get that freeze frame effect, maybe you've been in a car crash. And throughout, all aspects of performance, both mental and physical, tend to go through the roof. And by all aspects of performance, the list is really long, right? Motivation, productivity, creativity, learning, empathy, environmental awareness. These are just some of the cognitive skills. On the physical side, we see increases in strength, stamina, fast twitch muscle response, a couple other things. Our pain tolerance goes through the roof. So it's a huge boost in performance. And it also, and this sort of ties into some of the peak performance aging stuff, so we can just close that loop completely for people. Couple of things that are worth pointing out here. One is that when we are in flow, the state produces serious feelings of mastery, right? Your expertise, not laying down, and control. We don't feel peak performance on the inside, right? Like if you're looking at somebody in flow, you're seeing peak performance, but the interior experience is this, oh my God, I can control things I can't normally control, right? This could be a martial artist or a boxer where the fight slows down, right? And every punch is telegraphed. You exactly know how to block and counter. This could, any examples like that. It could be basketball players seeing the, hoop, the hula hoop. And we just feel in total control. This could be me as a writer doing like great things with my sentences that I normally can't do. And that sense of mastery and control, it turns out as we age, there's a lot of other things we can go into. We can talk about how flow impacts the immune system, whatever. But it turns out that older adults who experience challenging situations where they gain a sense of mastery and control outperform all other older adults in like longevity, health span, everything. It has a huge impact on your life. And these are the two things you get from flow. As a bonus, just to kind of flesh this out, cognitive reserve, which is the brain's ability to resist insults of age, right? It's resilience in the brain for the mind, basically. And the easiest way to increase cognitive reserve is to build up expertise. So flow, because it lays the foundation for mastery and accelerates learning, the way the brain tends to store expertise, the neural networks it creates, are actually neuroprotective against cognitive decline. So we know the brain power declines over time. It's inevitable, but you can protect against it and not suffer its effects. This is how. So flow plays a big role in helping us age well, keeping us young, a whole bunch of that thing.
Okay, so is it important? Do you think it's important, or maybe you might know because you researched this, is it important that we understand what the process of flow and have a perception of what's going on with us, or can we utilize flow without knowing that? Is it optimized by us going, yes, I know what's happening, I can understand? Because I think of, like for me, I think of when I was boxing, and there's the feeling of what you might frame nerves and shitting yourself, or there's the feeling of understanding that what is happening inside the body, the response to that is peak performances. You're ready for peak performance.
So I don't know if there's a universal answer here. What we believe at the Flow Research Collective is that the more you know, the more dangerous you are. If you can understand what are those feelings in your body, where did they come from, right? Like, for example, those nerves you talked about, the root of those nerves is the neurochemical norepinephrine. Norepinephrine underpins anxiety, but it also underpins excitement. And if you know that, it's actually easier to turn anxiety into excitement than it is to try to block the anxiety. So if you're before a fight, it's harder to calm the fuck down than it is to turn that fear into excitement, right? Like flat out. And so a little bit of cognitive literacy, knowing where you are and what you're doing. This is not really a flow question. This is more like neurobiology, understanding what's going on inside me question. I think it's really important. And I think it's very, very useful. There are cases, and I'll give you a great example. So Alex Honnold, the phenomenal rock climber who free soloed Half Dome and El Capitan, and Jimmy Chin made that fabulous movie about free solo. Alex, a friend of mine, and he was a fan of some of my earlier books. He's in Rise of Superman. His story is, and when I sent him Rise of Superman, he called me up a couple months later. He was really apologetic because it's super sweet, man. And he's like, Steven, you know I love your writing, and you know I really like all of your books. And I was like, Alex, just spit it out. What's the problem? And he's like, I do this stuff. I don't know how the sausage is made. And so Alex is probably the most extreme case you could possibly give, right? He's in situations where he falls, he dies, he's not in flow, he's got real problems. Like, he's a absolute master when it comes to this stuff. So, as a general rule, if you're Alex, maybe you don't want to know how the sausage is made. Maybe it will hamper you. But I think our experience, training hundreds of thousands of people at this point, is that, a little knowledge makes you pretty dangerous, and that's all, and that's useful. And we're big fans of that, the Flow Research Collective. If you take one of our trainings, we overemphasize the science compared to like a lot of other people who do this work. And we do because we think if you actually understand, most people don't understand how, like, they're kind of a mechanical system. The brain is really sexy. It does all kinds of crazy things, but a lot of it is very basic and mechanical, in the same way that a car is mechanical in a sense. And you can understand how the system works, and you can get it to work better. So we're big proponents of the knowledge. And for me, that was the biggest, at a personal level, that was really one of the biggest differences in my own life. Like, you can't tell me to do something if you don't tell me why, right? As a kid, I was terrible. My teachers hated me. My parents were if you didn't tell me why, I wasn't doing it. I don't care. I wanted to make my own choices, and that meant I need to know why. So that's how I'm wired. And I don't think everybody's wired that way, but I do think that the knowledge is useful, so we train everybody that way.
Yeah. Sometimes I think these days we collectively want to avoid struggle, and we want to avoid discomfort, and we want to avoid anxiety. And do you think that a part of that is affecting our ability to access flow or use what we
Yeah.
had. Like, we've got these functions that were obviously put into us as humans for a reason. Now we're trying to push them completely away and live in this comfort-driven life.
So I think it's twofold. And I think there's a different answer that you have to give post-COVID. But let me just sort of talk about the comfort-driven life first, and then we're going to talk about fatigue in a second. So flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. The most famous and well-studied is known as the challenge skills balance. So before I go into all the triggers or the challenge skills balance, let's just quick shorthand. Flow only shows up when all of our attention is focused on the right here, the right now, right? The present moment. It's the only way it can show up. So the challenge skills balance is the idea that we pay the most attention to the task when the challenge of that task slightly exceeds our skill set. So you want to stretch, but not snap. So metaphorically, though this is a fairly accurate metaphor, that in most people, it's about a 4% difference. So we pay the most attention to the task when the challenge of the task gets about 4% greater than our skill set, 5% greater. Now, this is tricky because for underachievers, for people who are shy, quiet, timid, whatever, you're just outside your comfort zone. So you got to get a little comfortable being uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
But for type A hard charging overachievers, it's too little. And overachievers, I myself is this way, will want to take on challenges that are like 20%, 30%, 40% greater than their skill set simply because it like wakes them up and suddenly they're paying a lot of attention. And that's fine. That's actually great for motivation, but you have to chunk it down. So the thing that's in front of you that you're doing right here, right now is only like 4 or 5% outside your sweet spot. Now, that means that we are constantly a little uncomfortable. So if you are comfort locked in, right, you have a problem. I'll give you a second crazier example, which is this. When we are younger, we are essentially addicted to dopamine and norepinephrine. These are the chemicals that underpin the seeking system. So when you're younger, when you're coming up in your 20s into your 30s, you're, who am I? What's my career? What am I going to do? I want to go have adventures. I need experience, all that stuff, right? That's a dopamine norepinephrine reaction. And it's about seeking, going into the world and getting shit. Once we get to our 30s and we get the job we want and we have the kids or the family, we start wanting to protect what we have, and we start getting addicted to different neurochemicals, all the neurochemicals that underpin social bonding, endorphins, oxytocin, serotonin. We trade addictions. And when you're addicted to safety and security chemicals, anything that challenges you, that rocks that boat, becomes harder. So this is a problem for everybody. This is one of the reasons we become more risk conservative as we age. It's this process. When we're younger, we're addicted to dopamine and norepinephrine, and these are risk-taking neurochemicals. As we shift into our 30s and 40s and 50s, that goes away. Now, if you really want to reignite peak performance aging, you actually have to reignite those addictions. You have to keep the safety and security stuff and balance it with more of that other stuff. But that's a totally different story. But back to the question you asked, there's one problem if you get sort of addicted to the creature comforts and you don't want it to be hard. Problem A. Problem B is there's actually basic brain chemistry underneath a transition that we go through in our 30s and 40s that works against this. And finally, the last bit is fatigue is a real, it's not just a psychological phenomenon, right? It has a neurobiological correlate underneath it that we're getting better and better at understanding. And it's a real thing. And it's a lot of people post-COVID are suffering from fatigue. It's a languishing. And when you're fatigued, the body is a homeostatic organism. And what that means is we have a certain energy level, right? And you're expending this much energy. Anytime you need to expend more energy, your body gets pissed at you and you'll get a sense of fatigue. So everybody knows this. When you the most fatigue you'll often get is like on the drive to the gym, right? Or you're putting on your sneakers and you're like, oh, I gotta fucking go to the gym. And that's your body going, no, you're gonna have to exert all this other energy, and you have some resistance to it. And of course, we all know we go to the gym and about 15, 20 minutes in, suddenly you get your second wind And that's actual, there's neurobiology underneath that as well, but that's literally the body saying, oh, you've reset the thermostat. We're at a higher energy level. And one of the things about peak performance is there's a third wind, fourth wind, fifth, and most people never get the chance to discover this because they're never push on their skills hard enough for long enough to get to that second wind or to get to that third wind. And one of the things about peak performance training is if you're training grit, part of training grit is literally just keep going, just so you can discover that you actually have these capabilities. Because once you have capabilities, it's not so hard to draw on them. Discovering you have them in the first place, that's a big energy expenditure. And we're gonna, for homeostatic reasons, we tend to fight against it. But it's totally there in all of us. So that was a really long answer to your question, but there's levels to it, and I wanted to try to speak to all of them. I hope that helped.
Oh, it does. I love that. How hard is it to know as an individual when you're overexerting, when to exert and when not to exert? And further to that, I often talk about this when I'm coaching people, and it's not necessarily around fitness. Sometimes it's just about life. And I'm trying to get people to understand that we all have to know when we need to kick our own ass, but also know when we might need to step back and have a rest. When are we burnt out? Like when does peak performance become I'm just an overtraining psychopath that's doing myself no justice?
For sure. Well, there's a lot, as you know. Again, there's a ton of answers I could give you.
Yeah.
So one, if you get to the brain fog, like if you wake up and your brain is really foggy and you're not sick, you're overtrained, right? Like that's the very first, like then you definitely pushed into overtraining on a physical fitness side. I think so. Burnout is real and it has to be really respected. It's a physiological condition with big neurobiological changes. It's a real problem. So I tend to think of it both cognitively and athletically, physically, when I start tripping over myself, when my dexterity actually starts to drop, I'm not coming back from that, right? I can push through stamina stuff. I can usually push through some strength stuff, but when you're all the way down to the chain where your stabilizer muscles are starting to fail, I'm not pushing through that. Right, like I'm getting clumsy. The other thing I also look out for is too much fear. When I'm feeling too much fear, that's another sign. Because sometimes if you try to push through too much fear, it's a really easy way to burn yourself out. Right, you can do it a little bit at a time when you're pushing hard against fear, but it's psychologically. So I'll give you an example so one of the things that happened. We saw in our country was this crazy experiment that I ran in peak performance aging, where I decided to try to teach myself how to park ski at age 53 is when I started. Now, park skiing is the discipline in skiing that involves jumps and rails and wall rides, and it's very acrobatic. And there are about 8 different biological reasons that it's basically impossible for anybody over the age of 35 to learn to park ski, according to older theories.
How many broken bones have you had, Steve?
None. I broke none. I broke none, and the goal was, could you go from absolute zero, no experience park skiing? I was a good skier, but not a park, no tricks, nothing, 0 to intermediate in a single season, which is a shitload of progress anyways in a single season. And at 53, the motor learning window slammed shut in late teenage years, and all this stuff that's supposed to make learning really difficult acrobatic skills almost impossible later in life. None of that was true. I pulled it off, got farther than I thought I was going to get. That was really amazing. My ski partner used the exact same protocol I was using. He got farther than I got. Then this year we took 17 older adults, no park experience, to use the exact same protocol and train them up. Then we took 2 bigger groups of older adults and stripped out the skiing and took the same principles and trained them up in peak performance aging and unleash them on the world, and it all worked. So the methodology has been hammered on a bunch. There's some good science underneath it. We've gotten good results for a lot of people, not just for me, because I don't prove anything other than, hey, this might actually be possible. The only thing I proved is that it's possible. right? But is it possible for other people or whatever? I don't think I'm particularly special, but I'm a researcher. And so like, what one person doesn't science make, but we've tried this stuff out. We've hammered on it. It tends to work. And you asked me a question that got me to here, and I told you this big long story, and now I can't remember what the hell you asked me.
Shit, me either. Was it? We'd
This is the
already.
Losers Podcast. Hi, and welcome to the.
I'll tell you why I got distracted because I was looking at the reflection of your. I think it's a little dog. There's a reflection in your bookcase. Dog
Oh,
moving
it's
around.
funny. He's I've got one of my chihuahuas is wandering around.
Yeah. So we were talking about the burnout, but I think I asked something after that.
Oh, the burnout. Excuse me. So this is directly relevant. This is the craziest thing. I had never had this experience before. I am not athletically gifted by any stretch of the imagination. I have earned everything the hard way. I've broken more bones than anybody. You know what I mean? Like it's really slow for me. And the protocol we used was incredibly successful. But I kept pushing outside like really hard. I was skiing some of the biggest lines of my life, and I was doing the hardest tricks of my life. And you can actually get PTSD from success, which I did not know.
What?
I only thought you can get PTSD from shit going wrong. But I would do these incredibly hard, scary things, pull them off, know that I would have to repeat the feat at some point to dial it in. And it was produced. I literally had no idea this was coming. I didn't know it was possible. I was at the end of the season. I called Laird Hamilton, the big wave surfer. And I was like, Laird, because he's been a friend of mine for a long time. I was like, dude, we got to talk because I had an experience this season that's never happened to me before. You can get PTSD from success when you're doing scary enough stuff. He's like, yeah. And I said, I had no idea it wasn't even possible. And totally possible. You can have even when you do it successfully, it can be scary enough that you still have like residual trauma from it, and it built up over time. So like I wasn't burnt out, I was still charging on, but what happened is my challenge skills sweet spot was shrinking. So by the end of the season, while I was still doing crazy hard stuff, if I was 1% pushing on my challenge, like I was overloaded because there was all this residual stuff that lingered from the season. And I had no idea. It was a totally de novo experience to me. I'd never encountered it before. I was like, I got to understand this. And we've done a lot of work on the difference between flow and trauma, because there are all these situations where it can go either way, right? Like think about a fight. You land the punch, everything goes right, suddenly you're in a flow state, but the punch just like a millimeter off and it glances off and you decide to criticize yourself for making a mistake, right? So almost the exact same punch, right? The difference is what happens afterwards in the head, and one can lead to flow, the other can lead to trauma or, a trauma-like situation.
Oh,
which is weird. So why one or the other is, and this is the reason I brought this up is both because it's an interesting question, and two, you asked a question earlier, and this sort of speaks to it also. You asked about the comfort trap, and one of the things that we've learned about flow, and we think is true, we're about to publish a paper on this. So we think it's true. We need more research, but it appears that even if it's only for an instant, flow is created by the willingness to approach, the willingness to say yes to the fight. So if you have a fear reaction, a freeze or flee reaction, even if you stay in the situation, if you're trying to avoid, that's the pathway that leads to trauma. Fight leads to flow. Now, you could obviously make a decision to fight and end up in a trauma situation later on, but my point is that decision to fight is always going to be energy expensive. It's always going to require, I gotta dive into this, whatever it is, right? And even if it only lasts in an instant, so there's always going to be, flow is an expensive state metabolically, and it seems like there's always an instant where the brain says, "Are you sure you want to spend that energy on it?" Right? Like you have to break through that barrier. It appears.
Oh my god. I love that. I'm so blown away by the PTSD from success thing. It's interesting. Earlier in the year, or 5 months ago, I lost my dog suddenly and unexpectedly at a minor vet trip. And yeah,
Oh, I'm so sorry.
was super devastated. And then I got myself a kitten. And I didn't know if I'd be a cat person. I was like, oh, we'll give this a go. Anyway, it was after a few weeks of having this kitten that I kind of
Tiffany, I leave you alone for a couple of years, and what happens? You become a cat lady.
I know, I'm sorry.
You know? Last time I met you, you were a boxer. You were a time. I turned my back for a couple of years. COVID happens, and now it's something. You're a cat lady. We talking about this?
I never thought it would come to this. But I remember saying at the time, after it was a few weeks after, and I kind of really hit, this burnout phase, and I went, I've lost my dog. I've got all this other long-term stuff that's been going on for a while. Then I've lost the dog, but then I've had this love and kitten kind of oxytocin. I said, and even though that's good, that I feel like that's been really taxing on my energy system. All of that, the good feelings, the good chemistry. Yes, no.
That's interesting. I mean, that's interesting, and well, energetically, there's got to be something, because you're like, if you have a kitten, you have to pay a lot of attention. There's gonna be a cost there. That's interesting. I that here's what I'm thinking.
You might have to get yourself.
Yeah, I mean, so the dog you saw walking around.
Yeah.
My wife and I do hospice care for dogs, right? That's part of what we've done. We've run a hospice care dog sanctuary for almost 16 years now. This was the original. Why did I get into peak performance aging? Because we developed a hospice care protocol for our dogs, and especially when we were living at our other facility, 650 animals passed through our facility. So huge data set. Like, we worked with a lot of animals. We helped another like 5,000 or so in the outreach programs, but directly, like, in our facility, in our lives, 600. And our healing protocol was amazing. And we would get dogs. We specialized in the worst of the worst. So if you're a 3-legged, one-eyed Chihuahua with an abusive past, cancer and heart disease and mange, you're our dog. Like, that's what we work with. And our dog's great vet care. And usually they would show up, the vet would say, okay, we love this dog, but don't get too attached. He's really sick. You've got a month, maybe 2. Know that. And we would get 3 to 4 years, healthy years, like hiking 5 miles through the backcountry every day kind of years. And after 650 dogs, you start saying, well, what the fuck is going on? Like, this is extraordinary. And the answer was really, like, it was funny. In a sense, we turned our houses, if you've heard the term blue zones, which are long-lived communities all across the world, where people tend to live on average about an extra 12 years than most other people. And so there's been an effort for the past 20 years to figure out why, and they know a bunch of things about blue zones. And we inadvertently had created blue zone conditions for our dogs, and we're getting actually better results. We were getting 3-4 years in dog years is 21 to 28 years in human life. And the blue zones, they get about an extra 12 years. So we had sort of doubled that. And I was like, well, is this possible in humans? What's this about? So that was before I did any of the ski experiments. When I started thinking about this, I came in not trying to help humans. I was following my wife into the dog hospice work is really what I was doing, and layering in some of the flow stuff and some of the other things that I knew about to just try to be useful. And the results were kind of jaw-dropping. So that was where it all started. But Pim is walking around. Pim was supposed to be dead on July 4th. Literally, like, we had a euthanasia scheduled. All the systems were shutting down, everything. And I decided that I was going to give him the greatest last week of his life ever. And Pim had been in a horrible accident about 1.5 years ago and never really recovered from it. But I was taking him everywhere and, like, giving him way more. Like, we didn't even think he was capable of this stuff, but I, like, started carrying him on hikes, and then I'd start putting him down on the flat parts. And, like, slowly over the course of a week, I started to see he wasn't dying, he was building up resilience, and he had a great week. And I was like, okay, you bought yourself another week. Let's just see how. It's now 4 months later, and he's healthier than he's been in like 3 or 4 years. That's amazing. But my point is, it's a miracle. And like every day I'm deeply grateful and I love it, but it's been the most exhausting. It's so taxing. So it's not exactly similar to your kitten. I'm getting tons of oxygen. I'm getting all those same chemicals, but it is definitely, some of it's extra work, right? He's getting he's probably getting an extra hour of my life every day now, which I really didn't have, but maybe more some days. But I like, that's, caregiver syndrome in a sense. And so what I was wondering when I was listening to you with the kitten is, could it be caregiver syndrome? Because it's often, it's interesting. And I think this happens. So you see this a lot. People get burned out, and they get burned out in work or whatever, and they'll go to their church, they'll go to whatever. And one of the standard bits of advice is, hey, you're too much in your own shit, be altruistic, give, right? Yeah. And so you end up in a situation where you do exactly what you and I are doing, and it works for a while because you get all the feel-good neurochemistry, but then you get sort of like a caregiver syndrome on top of the burnout, and that can be tricky. With burnout, now I think everybody's different on this, but I learned a long time ago from actually a friend of mine back in the 90s that I used to work with, a lot of photographer, and he would, every 9 weeks, no matter what, he would call it for, like, he would take, he needed 72 hours every 9 weeks, and he would have to shut it down, or he saw the quality in his art start to drift. I notice a lot when I feel like I'm writing badly. The good news is I work with an editor, so I have a feedback system built in. Often it's either I feel like I'm writing badly and it turns out I'm writing really well and I cannot tell. That's a sign I'm burned out. Or when I'm struggling and just writing bad. Like, both are signs I'm burned out. But I know for me, I literally I need to go away for 48 hours, not talk to anybody, get a hotel room with a porch that looks onto mountains, and read neuroscience, and often smoke a lot of pot. Really, like that, like literally, truth be told, that's what I'm doing for like 48 hours. It really, like, it just lets my brain drift.
When you said read neuroscience, I'm thinking, dude, is that a rest? Is that switching off?
It's, for me, so one of the weirdest things that has happened to me over the course of my life, as I've become expert at a number of different things, and I started to realize I was becoming an expert in neuroscience and maybe psychology when I started reading the neuroscience textbooks, and they were reading like thrillers. Like, that was when I was like, oh shit. It turns out if you actually know all this stuff, the textbooks are really exciting. I had no idea. Because I've only read textbooks as like a guy coming into the field, but it turns out they get really interesting if you know what you're talking about.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, it was really funny, but I remember I was reading The Cognitive Neuroscience of Attention by Michael Posner. It was the first time it happened to me. It was probably 5 or 6 years ago. And I remember, and I was in Aspen, and I remember that, and I had to give a talk or something. I stayed to like spend a couple days like just reading. And I remember being so excited that I was so hungry, and I couldn't leave the hotel room to go get something to eat because I was like, had all my workstation and the big textbook and everything else. And I was like, Steven, you could just order room service. Like, what's wrong? Right. It was one of those, but like that, I was like, okay, maybe that counts as a marker of expertise. When the textbooks start reading like thrillers, that's a sign. You know what you're talking about, maybe.
I noticed when I'm one of those type A, busy doing 88,000 things at once, and I noticed that, like, switching off for me is intense exercise or engaged exercise like boxing, because it's somewhere where I feel like, there's a lot of cognitive stuff going on that's very taxing on your body and your mind, but it is single focus. Like, I'm focused on one. It's the one thing that blocks everything else in the world out, where I think everything else in the world gets filtered in all the time and becomes really difficult to switch off.
My stuff, so I essentially have 2 seasons. I have ski season, which starts for me in November and usually can go through July. So it's a very this season I just didn't like, I was a little injured and I just wasn't bouncing back, so I killed it in May. And now is right when it gets dangerous, because I haven't been in a deep flow state since May.
Oh.
And writing is good. And some of this is intentional because I was training from injuries and like working on stuff this summer and didn't like go mountain biking or take the time to go surfing or do like, it was sort of intentional because I was working on stuff and I was trying to like I got my lifts heavier than they've ever been. At 55, I'm lifting and squatting more than I've ever been before, which is great. And I want to do that sort of stuff, but now I'm starting to notice it. So I was actually just out of town. I took 2 days off last week and went and read neuroscience down in Mammoth, and it got really quiet because I started to notice the same thing.
Is it really important for us to push for physical flow in order to tap into I guess cognitive flow in other areas of our life? I know that it's an interesting question. Please, you were saying, that you I know when I go down and I train with my coach and I'm pushed to the limits there, the drive back, my mind is just ticking away, and when I come back into the world, it's like pattern recognition of all the shit that I see there, that I see in life, and it's just such a process.
So here's the answer as far as I can tell. We all have a primary flow activity. That's the thing that we've usually done most of our life that just drops us into the state, right? For me, it's skiing. For you, it's punching people in the face. That's fine.
Let me know when you're in Melbourne.
Thank you. Thank you. You're so sweet. Everybody's got a primary flow activity. Here's what we know. Flow is a focusing skill. In the same way that mindfulness is a focusing skill, right? Different sort of muscles, different sort of focus a little bit, but essentially it's a trainable skill. And the more flow you get, the more flow you get. So I always tell people, if you get into flow Monday going skiing, if I get into flow on Monday going skiing, I'm going to have an easier time Tuesday, Wednesday, third, right? That's all true. There's also, as we move into flow, it tends to reset our nervous system and all the stress hormones get flushed out. And there's reasons why that's that's really important also for cleaning out burnout, right? Like if you want, and we know this. So one of the coolest flow studies that happened during COVID, in between us talking actually, was a study on languishing. And they wanted to know what were the conditions during COVID that produced languishing and who was flourishing after the COVID and who was languishing. And they looked at everything, health factors, emotional factors, performance factors. And it turns out there was only one thing that mattered. How much flow you got during COVID determines whether you're languishing or flourishing now. Literally, it was the only thing that mattered. It was a really cool study. Adam Grant gave a TED Talk where he references the study. He doesn't cite it, but it got a lot of attention that way. And I want to say Seeley is the researcher who did it, but I think that's wrong. Though I was just actually looking at the study like 4 days ago or 5 days ago, but I'm blanking the name of the researcher. But anyways, primary flow activity for you is boxing, for me is skiing. These are physical activities. I've always said you want to be cautious. Just because it may be physical for you doesn't mean it's physical for everybody else. And I will, in most things, I'm not physical first. I'm cognitive first and physical second. But because I'm a slow learner, physical skills. Once I get them, it'll work for me. But I'm a slow learner. It takes me a long time to get good at anything athletic. I'll do it because I'm fucking stubborn, but it takes me a really long time to get there.
Yeah. Oh, what was I going to ask then? This is literally the most appealing anti-aging serum ever, this conversation, by the way.
Oh, the other thing, I wanted to mention this a second ago, because this is part of the anti-aging thing and it's part of the burnout thing and it's part of all this whole conversation. So of the things that we know that flow amplifies, it amplifies happiness, meaning, well-being, purpose, all those big skills. In fact, the upper tiers of happiness, when psychologists define it, have flow baked into their definition. So this is really well established. But the peak performance aging stuff is really interesting. So there is a mechanism for adult development. Why do adults grow up? How does it happen? Csikszentmihalyi, the godfather of flow psychology, and I absolutely completely agree with this, makes the argument in like 3 or 4 of his books, and he worked a lot on development, that flow is actually the mechanism for adult development. Because in flow, you take a whole bunch of skills that you've sort of learned individually, you put them together and you automatize a whole thing, right? And then you can sort of do this big sequence effortlessly, and you can start to improv on top of it, and things along those lines. This mechanism of sort of onboarding expertise makes you more complex over time. So there is an argument to be saying that flow is the actual mechanism for adult development that drives us there. It certainly is also the mechanism for meaning. And if you want the second half of your life to really kick ass, right, you want as much meaning and engagement as possible, right? In a sense, what you really want, is you need to sort of turn your life into a high flow blue zone. And then you need to engage in what I would say would be like there's a mouthful here, but if you could turn your life into a high flow blue zone and engage in quests that require, and this is a fancy term, and I'll define it, dynamic, deliberate play. Dynamic, deliberate play is crucial. So dynamic play, old idea about aging, long, slow rot. All our physical skills decline, all our mental skills decline. There's nothing you can do to stop the slide. New theory on aging. Turns out all that is mostly wrong, not entirely wrong, but mostly wrong. The new lesson is all of the skills that we used to think declined are now, we now know they're use it or lose it skills. So if you're an 80-year-old master's level endurance athlete, you will have, because they've gone and looked, the VO max of a 35-year-old. Now, if you go into the literature, VO max declines with age, and there's nothing you can do to stop it until about 10 years ago. And then people started to say, hey, wait a minute, this is not true. We've got octogenarian athletes who are outperforming some of the younger athletes, and what's going on, and they measured their VO max. But you have to start training VO2 max, like high bursts of intense activity, right? 5 to 7 minutes long, really like in your 30s or 40s, if you want to do that in your 80s, right? So you can do it, but you just have to keep training it along the way. All those skills turn out to be use it or lose it skills. This is one of the reasons I could learn to park ski at 55 is they're use it or lose it skills. I just, luckily I've been an athlete my whole life. I had to certainly train up some more dexterity. Like there is some fast twitch muscle shit that I had to really, train up to learn how to do this in a different way. I'm going to stop there, ask another question.
All right. Here's
you have a look on your face like you got a question. Let me stop there.
I've got a question. I don't want the answer to it because I'm pretty sure I know the answer anyway, but I'm asking a lot of people. What's your stance on like martial arts and CTE for the brain? So I'll give you a little more context. Say someone like myself, I've had a few fights and everything. Someone that wants to goes, I still want to engage in this. I'd like to do a bit of sparring. Got a lot of awareness around the effects of that on our brain. Really appreciate the brain. Want to anti-age well. I want to optimize as I age. I want to get smarter, faster, better relative to my age.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I've had a lot of concussions. I'm an action sport athlete. I've had a lot of concussions, probably too many. Now there's cool work on TBI and there's interesting stuff. There's more stuff we can do now to prevent it. But it's a real thing, and I don't know if I have a stance across the board. I just it's a real issue. Has it held me back? No. But do I have, a couple of really good friends who have suffered really bad traumatic brain injuries over the years, and it cost them a year or two to get back from, and was heavy. And I have another friend, who knocked himself out that was skiing without a helmet, and he was on the Olympic team and no more, and put himself into a coma. and never got to compete at that level again, and hasn't been 100% right since. It was a lot of years ago, and the moral of that story is wear a helmet. In martial arts, you don't get a helmet. So you know what? Like that's a very individual kind of discussion. There are, I would. This is going to sound crazy, but because of what we know about anandamide levels in the brain and CBD levels in the brain, one, I would never engage in contact sports, any of that stuff without like taking a CBD product, because it's neuroprotective. It's not gonna, it's not gonna solve anything, but there's some stuff you can do in advance that you definitely want to be doing those things. And I'm like, when it comes to skiing, or all the action sports, I'm a huge advocate for body armor, more than most people actually wear. People don't wear the armor because they don't think it's uncool or uncumbersome, and that until they get really hurt, and then they're really sad that they weren't wearing. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a big fan of the body armor, and I talk it up, and I tend to usually be wearing some when I'm engaging with that stuff. So I'm overly safe with, like, I play really, really, really hard, but I'm overly safe with how I approach it.
It's interesting. I said throughout COVID, once I started doing the podcast, having conversations, did a few episodes on brain trauma and brain health and combat sports specifically, and I was like, yeah, I don't know if I can engage in this anymore. And then I was like, no more sparring, no more fighting, no more sparring. And then, but another thing that I have thought about a lot is the idea around the flow state and what the art of sparring, but also the social connection for me and the tribe and the family. And there's something really crucial and important that I got out of that. And I remember at one point that first realizing that and going, well, hang on, does the lack of those things negate the good of not getting punched? Like, which one's actually worse for the health?
I'd start shifting into a grappling heavy art, right? Like, I had a friend who in his 50s, he was like, I'm taking up Thai kickboxing. I was like, really? Really? Okay. You do know, like, the most injuries out of any martial art come out of Thai kickboxing. Yeah. You're sure? I'm for it, but are you sure? Like, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu might be really well suited to,
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Not that it wouldn't really stop me, but you are raising real issues. I would if I was in your spot, and I would look for more grappling based, or like ask yourself funny questions. Like, if it's no longer about, if it's the contact of the community, what about wrestling? Nobody's getting punched in wrestling, right? It'll help your fighting. Wrestlers are killer in the ring. They are. Nobody learns how to do it anymore because it's not sexy. But you can spar all you want, and you're probably not. You're gonna break some bones maybe, but you're probably not gonna get traumatic brain injury out of it. That's how I would start to think about it if I was up against a lot of internal resistance. It's okay, I need the contact sport. Yeah. What contact sport can I, has the least amount of TBI? That's
and the other thing that, and I think I told you this last time, but I haven't done a lot of it since, but rock climbing was the one that got me to that state of like, I want to hang in this feeling of fear. I want to access this level of holy shit.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if there's overlap between fighters and climbers. It's funny. I need speed, so rock climbing. I climbed for a decade. I like climbing a lot, and I still climb a bit. I'm afraid of heights. It doesn't go away. Like, I could never climb my way through it. Yeah. If I was climbing 3 times a week, I could sort of keep it at bay and perform well. But I never, in a decade of climbing, got into a flow state. Never happened. Never happened. Yeah. I love climbing. It's a blast, and it's super hard, but it wasn't flowy for me. I need speed. So a mountain bike, a ski, the gliding, the speed team tends to do it for me. Fighting was a little flowy, for me when I did it, but I ended up getting so injured so early, and like that was the end of my fighting career for such a long time, and still to this day, if I get punched directly in the nose, I could have really bad problem. My whole face got caved in a tournament, so like my nose, my eye socket, all of it's plastic, and they sort of were like, "Don't get hit in the nose again if you could avoid getting, you know." I was like, okay. They're like, we don't really want to rebuild your sinus cavity. And I've had it redone twice now. You don't ever want to have your sinus cavity rebuilt. It's so fucking painful.
Well, look, see that I'll give my side on profile. I've got the pointiest little nose, and I'm so thrilled that it never got broken. I don't know how. I went into the sport thinking, well, this is definitely not going to come out looking too good at the end. And don't worry, it wasn't because I was great at defense. It definitely, I can attest that it was not for that reason.
All right.
What was I going to say? Are there typical ways that us humans unknowingly get in the way of flow state? Avoid it or push it away or...
Yeah. Well, let me answer this by sort of giving you and the listeners a gift. It turns out there's a bunch of different flow blockers, and there's 6 major ones. And at the collective, we built a diagnostic. So if you go to Flow Research Collective /flow blockers, it's a free, so www.flowresearchcollective.com /flow blockers. It's a free diagnostic that we built, and it's really thorough and it's really rigorous. So like you take it and then we'll email you your results and a very detailed step-by-step. This is where you are. This is what to do about it. But there are a bunch of them. For most everybody, it's distraction for most of us. Flow shows up when all of our attention is in the right here, right now. And, so complete concentration is a flow trigger. And we tell people, we know this 90 to 120 minutes is what the brain is built to do, to pay attention. Like that's a great minute focusing period. And if you want to sort of block that on your calendar, like a 90-minute focus period for flow, you have to practice distraction management ahead of time. So you got to turn off all your devices. You got to turn off. You don't think you're going to be more powerful than this. Like this was designed to be like a slot machine. Literally, like when they were designing phones, the technology they based your phone on is a slot machine, the most distracting, addictive technology ever created. That's what we're carrying around with us. So don't think you're going to overpower it. I'm the world's leading expert, or one of them on this stuff. I can't overpower it, right? Like I know it 17,000 different ways and have taught hundreds of thousands of people about it. And I'm not going to win this fight. No, you're not. Or you'll win it early in the day when you have willpower, but it'll decline over time. My point is, practice the distraction management for complete concentration, right? Like you manicure it. And I always say that doesn't just mean turning off your alerts, turning off your email, turning off your phone and all that stuff. It also means having conversations with, not just like your boss, your coworkers, your loved ones. Loved ones are really important. If you've got kids, if you've got a spouse, a partner, like you've got, like, this is my flow time. And the cool thing about flow is it's a massive boost in productivity. So you end up with way more time back especially for like having conversations with bosses and spouses and whatnot. Like when McKinsey did their 10-year study of how productive were top executives in flow, they went around the world asking top executives how much more productive they are in flow than out of flow. It's been a decade doing it. It's subjective. It was self-reported. It's a grain of salt on that one, right? But the average response was 500% more productive. Whoa. That's massive. That means you go to work on Monday, spend Monday in a flow state, and you will get as much done as your steady state peers for the rest of the week. Like they work Tuesday through Thursday, you work one day a week, and you're going to get as much done as they will if you're in flow. That's what the state allows. So you want to have these conversations ahead of time, because whoever wants more of your time, they're actually going to get it. But to get it, they have to leave you alone so you could focus in these like 90-minute blocks, because that's what the brain, right, was designed to do. We know we have a 90-minute sleep cycle, REM cycle, everybody talks about. We got a focused waking cycle. It's the exact same length. It's the same thing. And you want to perform at your best, take advantage of your biology, right? I always say that peak performance is nothing fancier than getting our biology to work for us rather than against us. We are biologically designed to focus from 90-minute blocks and drop into flow. And when we do that, that's how we're wired. But if you're not, if you can't carve out 90 minutes free of distraction, you're never going to figure this out. And I always tell people with that one, don't start with 90 minutes. Like, that sounds scary to most people. They're like, fuck, I don't have 90 minutes. What are you kidding? I've got right. So start by 15, 20 minutes. 15 minutes of uninterrupted concentration is usually enough to start sliding towards flow. We know this from research with coders. In fact, we know from research with coders that when you get distracted and knocked out of flow, it will take a minimum of 15 minutes to get back in, if you can get in at all, but it'll cost you at least 15 minutes to get back in. So there's an interruption cost that's pretty significant as well. So, but I always say with any hard thing, start by starting. If you're going to get time back, if you're going to be hyper productive, right? Don't believe me. Don't take my word for it. Try it. See if it drops you into flow. See if it makes you more productive, and then it buys you back time in your day, right? None of this is stuff you should take on faith. All this stuff is the experiment to run in your own life.
It's so interesting. You are so interesting. What a resource. As you're saying that, I was thinking about all the people, like the idea of flow, and how you can it's this untapped thing where you can just tap into it and get more out of yourself. Yet it's work to learn it and get it and do it and understand it. Like, it's work. And I wonder, what you probably know, what are the percentage of the people that learn this and go, yeah, I'm doing it, and the ones that go, fuck, that's still too much work, I'll just plod along not flowing.
So that's interesting. I don't know if I know the answer to that question, but it's probably somewhere. We're data geeks at the Flow Research Collective, so we measure everything, right? I can tell you, for example, that on average, after an 8-week training, and our training's intense, right? You go through the PhD psychologist as a coach, and it's a lot of work. Don't even vaguely kid yourself. But we see on average a 70 to 80% boost in flow. In fact, I can tell you that the last 1,000 people who went through my training, on average, they saw a 71.25% increase in flow, because I just saw the most current data. This stuff is really trainable. It's really trainable. We're all hardwired on it. You can really get a lot more. What I find, so here's what's interesting. Here's something weird. This was one of the differences between my first flow company and this company. And one of the reasons I do things very differently now, early on, we saw that same increase in flow. It turns out this stuff so if you understand, flow's got a cycle. It's a 4-stage process, and it's got 22 known triggers. If you understand what the triggers are and how the cycle works, you've got the map of the territory and the thing that'll drive you into flow. So you're good. That will significant. What's interesting is that's not that hard to do. That's fairly learnable. What's really hard to do is stabilize that 70% boost in flow. It's not get there, it's stabilize it, because that's actually what requires all the work. And to stabilize it, that requires that you have to start training up motivation. So this was sort of in Art of Impossible, one of my older books, but
awesome book, by the way. I've told so many
flow,
people.
Thank you. When we talk about cognitive peak performance, right, there's 4 categories. There's flow. There's a bunch of shit that falls under the heading of motivation. There's another stuff under the heading of learning and creativity. And the way to think about it is, in any challenging situation, motivation gets you into the game. Learning allows you to continue to play. Creativity is how you steer, especially when you're going for high, hard, I don't quite know how to get there goals. And then flow is how you turbo boost the results beyond kind of all expectation. And so it turns out flow is actually really easy to train, but if you don't train up motivation, learning, and creativity at the same time, flow is this massive turbo boost, and it's not stable. And you can't stabilize it if you haven't trained all the things that flow is going to amplify. If you haven't trained it up, I'll give you an example. We talked earlier about the challenge, skills, balance. So obviously, if every time you get into flow, you're pushing on your skills, right? And extending them a little bit more and extending them a little bit more. This means you have to be very good at learning, right? Because you have to keep learning to do this. If you're not great at learning, what's going to happen is I could teach you this stuff. Start using the challenge, skills, balance, blah, blah. You'll start getting into flow, right? That's that 71% boost in flow we saw. But if you're not good at learning, if you don't actually have proper learning skills, and I break all that down in Art Impossible in terms of like what that looks like and what those skills might be, and how to use them. But if you don't have that, it's not stable. You can't keep getting into flow because you literally can't keep onboarding the new skills you have to onboard to keep getting into flow, right? If you're not a good learner, you've got problems here. So you have to work on your learning skills. So the problem is less about like getting people into flow, right? Like that, and more about like, once I teach you there, how to stabilize it. And where this gets tricky and where this gets difficult is flow's the best we get to feel on earth. I mean, it's a big high, right? We love it. It's the most addictive feeling on earth. And if I increase the most addictive, pleasurable feeling on earth in your life 71%, and then you start getting more of this, and then suddenly you're locked out, then you're pissed. That was what was the problem in my earlier company, is we could produce this stuff. We weren't training all the other stuff, and we weren't focused enough on full scale peak performance. There was just too much other things going on. So when I restarted the Flow Research Collective and pulled it in, this was one of the problems I was trying to solve. So I think you are right. There are probably people, and what I always say is, I don't know if this is a flow thing, but I've noticed this is a peak performance thing. I don't think it's true across the boards, but you know who often has the hardest time in adulthood? Those people who had a really easy time in high school and grade school. I often find that, like, if you were super attractive, super smart, super athletic, any of those packages where life was a lot easier for you and you didn't learn the grit skills, it's harder to learn grit skills as an adult than it is as a kid. It's easier, I find. I don't think this is a blanket statement across the board, but it's as close as I can get to one. I have seen that it is people who get their ass kicked in grade school, high school, like that sort of thing, they have a much easier time sometimes with some of the peak performance stuff, because grit can be a trick. It's a harder thing to learn as an adult. And now, invariably, you usually, the best athletes sometimes are academically challenged or that sort of stuff. And that's not an intellectual thing. Like if you've got physical expertise, you've got cognitive expertise. Like I've seen that over and over and over again. Like, yeah, that's very transferable. I think the dumb jock is a lie, actually. I don't think that's actually, like, based on what we now know about embodied cognition and how brains work and how we learn. I don't like, I think that is a misnomer very, very often. But besides the point, I do think, like, if you have a pretty easy childhood, peak performance can be difficult in adulthood, can be more difficult, because you have to get really comfortable with being uncomfortable. And nobody wants to, very few people willingly suffer for extended periods of time. But by suffering for extended periods of time, that's how you figure out what grit is, what you're capable of. And all those are hard lessons to learn, right? Unless you've been punched in the mouth a bunch, metaphorically, or you know what I mean. But you know what I mean.
Yeah, that is so interesting, and I agree with that. It's interesting. I look at myself. I didn't step into the boxing ring until I was 29, and I was someone who had this mindset when I was younger of, I'm either good at it or I'm not. And if I'm good at it, someone will tell me, and if they tell me, then I'll do it. And if not, just the next shiny object kind of thing. I wouldn't say things were easy for me. I definitely suffered in ways, but I didn't develop that mindset until that boxing fight, that corporate boxing event, and that changed my world. And I went, fuck, I wish I experienced this I wish I knew and made sense of what I've just been through when I was younger. Because I realized that I can learn anything.
For me, one of the big ones for me was the first time. So I was very skinny. When I graduated high school, I was my height, which was about 5'10", and I weighed 130 something. 120 something, I think. I was really skinny.
What's that? Do you know what that is in kilos? Is that about 60 something?
Less, I think. A little less.
Yeah,
It's
right.
3 point. Well, no, kilos. What's the conversion? It's 1.6. So it's more than 60, I think. I'm going to get it wrong.
You talk, I'll Google it. What was
Yeah,
it?
you Google.
130 pounds?
My point is, that's when I graduated high school. And through weightlifting, it took 10 years. I'm an extreme ectomorph. It took 10 years, and I finally got myself up to 170. I got sick when I was 30, and I lost about 20 pounds, and I now hover around like 155. I've been trying very hard to get back up to 160. I think 170 is probably impossible at this point.
So you went from about 59 to about 77 kilos for all of our Aussie listeners.
Okay, and it took 10 years and that was the thing. Working on something. So I remember I was in a gym. I was in San Francisco. I was in a gym. I had been working out for 4 years by this point, and some huge muscle dude came up to me. He's like, "Dude, don't worry about it. Stick with it. You'll get muscles. You'll be fine." I had been in the gym for 4 fucking years. At that point, I nearly killed him. I was ready to kill the guy. He was trying to be sweet, and I wanted to kill him. And it was 10 years before I got the results I wanted. And I think there's something to be said for 10-year goals. I like my books because they're 2 to 3 to 4 year goals, but setting and reaching really long goals, and a lot of that muscle is hard to develop, and it's such a differentiator. If you can set out like, okay, this goal is 3 years out, it's 5 years out, over and over and over again, there's a lot of momentum from that. I think as you age.
I love that. I could literally have you here for half a day and not let you go. You're such a bloody, yeah. I'll be knocking on your door again at some point. So for everyone that's listening that's interested, as am I, you've got, is it 14 books? 14?
In our country is 14. Yeah.
14. Yeah,
the new one makes it 14.
By February, it'll be 14 books. So you've got, The Art of Impossible I've recommended to so many people because I read that after I spoke to you last time, and I resonated with this process that I went through when we went into lockdown, and I started the podcast and I was editing and I started doing sketching and launching this new business, and I just resonated with the process of that and what I saw myself, evolve throughout it. So that was awesome. What else have you got courses or things on workshops or things online that people can access as well to get? For sure. The Flow Research Collective is your friend here, and just click on the training tab. We have Zero to Dangerous is our standard training for everybody. And we train coaches as well. We don't certify anybody. You can't get it. I always say that if you want to get certified as a flow coach, it's called a PhD. But we do try to train up. If people are coaching and they want more flow stuff, again, super rigorous training, by the way, super rigorous training. And then we've got, some stuff we do with companies and whatnot, flow for leaders and high flow leadership and things like that. But we've got flowresearchcollective.com. All your training needs are there. All of it's digitally delivered. You're a legend. I'll have the links to that in the show notes. Thank you so much again for dropping in and having a chat, and go and give your dog a little cuddle now. He's scooting around in the background. Yeah, I think he's looking at me like, dude, if you don't let me out, I'm going to pee on your floor. That's the look I'm getting. I got to go let it out. This was a question. That was a question I was going to ask when we were talking about that. What are we doing wrong what are we missing with our pets? If you're getting these animals to live so much longer, what is it that we're missing? So a couple things that are like so all mammals have the same emotions as we have. Right? So all the same, this is going back to we know this. They share all of our dogs, especially share our social emotions. Dogs are insanely curious. So usually one of the big secrets with dogs especially is
knowing that as they age, that you have to take them into the world and say that and solve that in the same way you do with humans. And so, like, when your dog's out there smelling, you always have to remember what smelling a spot on the ground is to your dog is what reading a book is to you. Right? That's the amount of information they're taking in when they smell. So one of the things is when we hike our dogs off leash through the back country. We never hurry them along. Like the smelling, the curiosity, so if you have a hyper anxious dog, chances are you don't have an anxious dog. Chances are, because anxiety and curiosity are opposite sides. Same thing with excitement. We talked about that earlier. So if you have got a high anxiety dog, it probably isn't getting its curiosity needs met. And you can deal with the anxiety with curiosity and exercise and things like that. So I think what we're not realizing is dogs need flow, just like we do. They need a lot of affection, right? And the animals in our life, they need a lot of affection. They also need direct attention. So this is something people screw up with animals a lot. If you really want to heal the dog, especially an old dog, we have enforced petting sessions where we actually you're not watching TV, you're not reading a book, you're focused, because just like humans, right? If I'm reading a book and paying attention to you at the same time versus paying attention, so does your dog, of course. So we screw up by doing things like, I'm petting the dog and reading my book and like thinking that you're meeting that animal's emotional needs. Well, no, would you get your needs met if your, partner was like sort of like stroking your head and reading it, doing this, like, no, they have very human-like needs. And so that's a lot of it, or a bit of it.
I love that. I'm really glad I asked that question. I'll let you go
now. All right. I gotta jump. I'm now 15 minutes late for a meeting.
Thank you so much, Steven, and thanks everyone for listening.
You're welcome. And next time I'm in Melbourne, I'll look you up so you can punch me in the face.
Yes, I cannot wait.
I've been looking for an excuse to come to Australia. Now I have one.
Now you have it. All right, book that ticket.
Fabulous. Bye.
Bye.